Hi there. To get my head round Gnosticism, I find it very useful to draw block diagrams and schemas of one sort or another. And the second thing I want to say before starting this discussion is that we live in a world of relative abundance ever since the 1960s in most part of the world. So when I talk about this world of scarcity, again, it's relative scarcity I'm talking about rather than absolute scarcity. Although I think in the 12th century, when Gnosticism had a kind of social revival in the south part of France, amongst nobility and populace and clergy, I think that life was very, very tough indeed. You'd have 18 children, and 10 of them would die before the age of 5 or even more. And you'd be lucky to have 2 or 3 children to run your farm when they would have all got to 18, or to marry them off. Life was very, very tough. And that continued really in most parts of the world, and for most classes. I think really up until the 1860s, something like that, depending on where you were in the world, of course. Um, but the thing about this world, whether it's in relative abundance or relative scarcity, this material level of existence, and I got is the sheer all the ironies of life, the apparent randomness, the tragic, comic tragedies of life, the dissatisfactions of life, the absurdities of life, the distortions of life, the contradictions that are inherent in existence, which I haven't got listed here. I mean, it's just amazing, really. It's a tapestry of struggle, really, and a puddle of self pity that we could fall into very easily as a result of all these things that happen in life. And the dog barks, and the storm cracks overhead, and people come and people go, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on, and this is life in the material world. But then recently, last night, I had a dream, the details of which I will not bore you with because there's nothing worse than people relating their dreams on YouTube, I think, unless they're really apocalyptic or something. Anyway, visiting the astral level, as I do quite intensely with very lucid dreams indeed, I was struck basically how much more the astral level is ironic, absurd, comic, tragic, dissatisfying, random almost as well, and because I know and I know it's on the symbolic level only, perhaps. But it seems to me that the astral level is even more crazy than the material level. Certainly, it's more causal. And I was thinking to myself, would this speculating, which is all that one can do, would in fact this craziness, randomness, absurdity actually go follow up all the way up the levels to the upper etheric levels, because and only because the etheric levels, the astral levels, and the material level are all realms of the demiurge, all realms of duality. So contradiction and duality would follow you up all the way up to the highest levels of trance, to the highest level of ritual attainment, or some kind of psychic attainment or psychic connection. Um, and you'd follow a path, a crooked path, all the way up to the top, because this triangle and this circle, triangle represents all the sort of ethereal levels of consciousness, and the circle here represents the material level of consciousness, which is, with its relative scarcity, and it's all demiurge. It's all demiurgical, if there's such an adjective. It's all part of dualism. Now I know that you could say, well, you have the Holy Spirit here, the action of the Holy Spirit, which extends definitely extends to the esoteric level, and of course can through miracles to extend all the way down to the material level here. So you've got the Holy Spirit can act on all levels simultaneously as well, with perhaps its actions of non-duality and non-dualism and love and wholeness coming to fruition, even in the midst of the material level and the astral level, for example. But I mean, apart from that, this is a salutary reminder not to get stuck in even the most highest levels of trance, because it almost seems to me that the contradiction and absurdities and all the rest of it start off fairly narrow here, and by the time they get to the esoteric level, it's schizophrenic. I mean, the demiurge literally is schizophrenic, giving with one hand, taking with the other, where dualism becomes at its most keenly felt and most powerful manifestation, if manifestation can be said of these levels, of course, and which, I mean, certainly in the terms of experience, they can be said to be manifestational. But at these levels, the duality, the absurdity is at its worst, in quotation marks. That is, you think you're dealing with things on this level when in fact you're not. The sand is slipping through your fingers faster at these levels than it would be on the material level, because at least the material level is governed by some kind of causality or perceived causality, whereas randomness increases as you get to these levels. So then I was thinking, well, if this is a closed system, apart from the action of the Holy Spirit, the intervening good energy that comes into these levels and can come into them, I mean, if this is a closed system and there's no further way out of the demiurge, even though you think you're getting more and more sort of esoteric and etheric, in fact, you're getting more and more sort of sunk in the mud of the demiurge. What is it about the material world which is, despite the fact it's so dense and material, is in fact the very source of liberation? And I came to the conclusion that it kind of wraps itself round the whole model, and in a way, the material level, the level of this earth, the level of so-called evil matter, the realm of the demiurge, the lower worlds of the demiurge, actually juxtaposition very well with the non-dualistic, ineffable spiritual realm. In fact, almost to the point where you get to the bottom of the tree of life, you get to the 10 of cups or whatever, and then you shoot back up to the ace of swords. So here the ineffable realms, you have all the aces. I'm talking in tarot terms here. You have all the aces here. And then you have all the tens down here, the tarot, and you get back up to the aces when you get to the tens. So in a sense, the material level which we experience is actually more open to the spiritual level than we imagine, which is comforting to know. And the Holy Spirit actually acts more effectively, perhaps, on the material level, ironically enough, than it does even on the etheric level. Although I think that possibly the etheric level does have more of a connection with the ineffable than any other level. It's a bit complicated. It's closed and yet it's open, if you see what I mean. And indeed, the material level is probably closed and open at the same time as well. It's just that I feel that you could probably stay in the material level and perceive it in spiritual terms. You'll forget, you remember I drew kind of like a picture of the fetus here. And then I did this. I went up and I changed, inverted the colours. If I could find it again. Inverted the colours, and then you see that the evil matter is evil spread over the ineffable world, and in fact, if this is kind of representing a material object, you can see that behind this material object lies the ineffable light, which is what it means perhaps in the Gospel of Thomas when it says about Jesus says, pick up the stone, look into the material, and you'll see that it's kind of it's a it's like a sort of a brass rubbing, if you know what I mean. And you can see that you can rub the black coat off, scrape the black coat off, and the white is underneath, sort of thing. So, as I say, within the coal bunker, there is this feeling that the gold nugget is within the coal bunker, and in the gold palace, which is gold palaces, the occult worlds, the esoteric, the astral, there is considerable dirt, in fact, hiding away underneath its gold structure. So this represents the golden palace of the esoteric and the occult, which holds more duality, more contradiction, more absurdity, more tragic comedy, etc., than in the material world, where if you perceive it with a spiritual light and look into yourself and find the soul within you and look through the soul's eyes at the material level, then you can see that that you can see underneath the stone. You can break the piece of wood open, as it says in the Gospel of Thomas, and see the light, the ineffable light within. Despite the fact that you're looking at a material object, right, which is supposed to be the site or nexus of evil, according to the Gnostic view. So almost good and evil. Certainly, dualism and non-dualism apply. I suppose good and evil are the wrong words to use, really. It's simplistic to say that matter is evil and spirit is good. I suppose it's better and more accurate to say spirit is non-dual and matter is dualistic. And that is the true dualism, if you like, of Gnosticism. It's not between good and evil. It's between dualism and non-dualism. But I'm saying also, and I have said this before, that the occult realms, the etheric realms, the etheric levels of consciousness, are more treacherous, actually, than the world that we could perceive if we perceived the world through spiritual eyes. Which I guess is probably why, there is in Orthodox Christianity a kind of a negative attitude towards occultism, divination, psychism, as indeed there are to a lot of spiritual groups. You can use these levels, but they are very, they are treacherous, and they're more. Also, I think the levels are more attached to ego. I could almost say that the Holy Spirit is very active in the higher levels, but so is the ego. Do you know what I mean? So you could attach any of these experiences to your ego, and think you're your God, basically, when you're not God. And I mean, thou art God. When you think of that formula, thou art God, which is possibly the most secret teaching of Jesus, thou art God. Tag, thou art God. I mean, the thing is that all that really means is that you're the same stuff. Your soul, thou bit, your soul is the same stuff as God, homusios. Okay, the same stuff. But it doesn't mean to say that you're God or you're better than God or you'll have as much power as God. You're still in relationship to God, so you're not in a dominant relationship with God or a submissive relationship with God. You're equal to God because you're the same stuff as God. So thou art God, that's what it means. You have to put that caveat in that you are the same stuff of God, but you are not God. And you are definitely not the demiurge, because the demiurge does not share power. The demiurge is not anything. The demiurge is just dualism, the stuff of dualism, which your lower selves, lower vehicles, are also the stuff of dualism. You see. So anyway, again, if I'm not exactly dissing astral level and dreams and things like that. I mean, they're very useful. All I'm basically saying, like in the Kabbalah, don't get lost in the details. The devil's in the details. Literally, the demiurge is in the details. Don't get lost in the details. Don't get lost in the names of the goetic demons and the orders and the suborders and all that. Because it can send you mad. Do you know what I mean? Literally mad. It can send you into psychopathy, into megalomania. And you could get very sort of legalistic about it, and you could say to people, you're not doing it right. You've got to do it this way. You've got to do it my way. And so all sorts of crazy stuff could start to happen as a result of being on the astral levels only. You've got to come back down to earth, and yet you've also got to see the earth through spiritual lives, through your spiritual soul eyes and senses, if you like, spiritual senses, in order to see the ineffable light within all objects. And also you've got to see the ineffable light in some people, in some scriptures, the miracles, things like that, really. So you don't look at, you try to avoid what they call materialistic spirituality, but you spiritualize the material, I suppose, really, to a certain degree, but don't get too carried away with that either, because you will find yourself drifting into this closed system, dualistic system of the occult, per se, and then you might get terribly lost, terribly dependent, terribly addicted, terribly escapist about it all. So be very, very careful. Be very, very careful, because not all that glisters is gold, sort of thing. There is deception, even at the highest levels of trance. There is deception. There is a possibility that you will fall. The higher you are, the greater the trance, the higher you can fall from trance into not just the material world, but below that. You can actually go really, really down into the psychotic, demonic worlds, and get completely lost in total and utter madness, which is really defined as a disassociation from common sense and from the material world, from the real world and and definitely disassociation from other people. So you become, psychopathic. You don't see anyone. You become sort of autistic, as it were. Nobody else exists but you, and people are just pawns to move around the place. Well, I mean, you can imagine that if things on the astral level are sort of pawns that move around according to some strange magical consciousness, you can imagine that you could start doing that with real people. And then you'd come into an ethical conflict. Then you'd come into problems of morality, which you might not have. It's, look at morality. I mean, you're in relationship with people, with real people on the material level. When you get to the astral level and above, your sense of morality doesn't almost apply, because you're not hurting anybody on the material level. So you can go higher and higher and higher and become more and more amoral. But if you translate that amorality down to the material world again, you're going to become a sorcerer. You're going to become despised. People are going to hate you. And maybe you don't mind that, but maybe you don't mind exploiting people, like as if they're pawns and energy packets, and you can just treat them however you like. But I draw the line at that, really, and a lot of magicians do draw the line at that. We won't go to that extent. We won't see people as just things to be manipulated, exploited, and predated on. You might be able to see things on the astral like that, but you can't see things on the material like that. And I would also suggest that in a way you should avoid the areas of consciousness where morality does not apply, because you can get lost and then start applying your amorality to the material world. So that I'm just saying, I'm not judging, and I'm not kind of like recommending any ethical, moral standpoint about any of this. It's up to you, of course. You're responsible for your own actions, and you can take from this whatever you want. I'm just sort of, advising gently about the possibility of becoming lost. And we're lost enough as it is on the material level, but then when you get onto other levels where you can become even more lost, This seems common sense seems to suggest this is not a good idea. Um, and it would take a very powerful magician to keep all these planes apart and be able to operate, and not have certain higher levels spill over to their material level. Um, it's like can angels cut themselves shaving? That's what Crowley asks, and of course Crowley is a fine one to talk because he was on heroin most of the time and cocaine. He sometimes had no idea what was real and what wasn't real, and so therefore he could act in ways which seemed to us to be totally immoral. And justify it to himself on the grounds that, oh, I'm a god, so I can do whatever I like. Basically, thou art God. Well, it doesn't mean that. God, thou art not. Thou art God, but God, thou art not. Okay, bear that in mind. And this, if you read the Golden Dawn book of magic, edited by Israel Agadi, this is all said in there as well in the opening chapters, because especially warning neophytes against all this crazy stuff that they can fall into. There are loads of pits that a neophyte can fall into, and I might say the adeptus exemptus could fall into these pits even more easily than you can as a neophyte or newcomer. Because you have the sort of innocence to guide you and guard you, but they don't. But they lose their innocence along the way, and so they're even more likely to go crazy than you are as a neophyte. So I just thought that this is a bit of a rant now, so I think I'm going to stop at this juncture, and leave you to contemplate the structure of the universe as I have presented it.